What's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. I am Connor O'Gara. Will, how was your weekend?
It was amazing, man. I got to relax. I got to, what's your take on the Drake Kendrick beef?
Don't understand a second of it. I just saw the tweet about Drake buying abs, and I thought I can't be pro Drake if he bought abs.
Well, say what you want about your methodology, but you ended up in the right place. Drake got cooked. It was rough for the Drizzy stands. So it was a great weekend. Like, I very rarely have a weekend where I just kind of do nothing. You know that about me. I was just locked into my phone, retweeting stuff. It was a great time to just be online all weekend.
Love it. Very rarely do I feel like that actually applies to a good time to be online.
Yeah.
Most times are not. I was not online at all. It was great. It was like first weekend in probably 2 months that I didn't have at least some form of work with draft or spring games or college basketball, whatever. Birthday weekend. Birthday was on Friday. Went to the beach on Saturday. It was absolutely lovely, minus the car ride, but everything else was fantastic. I mean, it was one of those weekends where I'm like, this whole like not having responsibilities on a Saturday or Sunday. I don't want that for the fall, but this time of year, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So we enjoyed ourselves.
You sent me some super cute pictures of your family, you and Claire. Unlike Drake, you're not hiding a daughter. You're very proud of her. So that's great.
We are trying to keep her face off of social media on certain platforms. So yes, we are kind of hiding her in a way.
Oh, well, don't let Kendrick get wind of that because you're cooked.
True.
Okay, buddy?
No, but she exists. We acknowledge Claire's existence. That's all that matters. Great show lined up today. We have Shane Beamer joining us in a little bit here. He's going to talk about the Spencer Rattler draft fallout, how a lot of that went down behind the scenes, kind of what his reaction was. We'll also talk about not coming necessarily to that level of expectations in 2023, what it looks like for 24 with LaNorris Sellers and Rocket Sanders, Nyck Harbor stuff in there as well. And then we're going to end with some lad of the week. But Will, let's start with a question here. A question. Have we seen the last SEC coach leave for another conference? Let's think about that. You don't have to answer it right now.
Okay.
But we can come back to that in a second here. That question was something that I wondered about on the heels of Kirby Smart's new contract, which, oh, by the way, 10 years, $130 million. He's getting $13 million annually. He is the highest paid coach in college football once again. Poor Kirby, what a struggle he endured. He's worth even more than that. I will argue that until I'm blue in the face. He just is. When you get off to 3 consecutive 12-0 starts and you have as many losses in a 3-year stretch as you do national championships, you get that sort of treatment. That's the way that college football is currently being monetized. Good on Kirby for getting paid once again. What I kept thinking about was how at no point during any of this did we ever make any sort of arguments as to whether or not Kirby could leave for another job. At no point would that have felt justified. If we had tried to throw that out there, it would have been deemed clickbait, even if there was nothing to click on. It just wouldn't have been a take that would have been absorbed and accepted by anyone, and it wouldn't have been something that I could have said with any ounce of truth behind it. And obviously, when you win the program, its first national title in 4 decades, and you go 15-0 with a team that lost more talent to the NFL draft during the 7-round era than any team ever has before, these things matter, and that's why we're not necessarily talking about that buyout and what it would be if things went south for him. The guy has earned it, and he's at his alma mater. So that's part of it too. That's why we're not talking about, would he leave for this job? Would he leave for this job? Would he ever leave for Alabama? We didn't really even have that conversation when Nick Saban retired. And I thought that at one point during Kirby's start at Georgia, that would be the entire conversation, and it didn't end up being that. But being at your alma mater doesn't guarantee that you'll stay there forever, because whether coaches want to admit it or not, there are obvious economic factors that come into play. Take a look at Jonathan Smith. Jonathan Smith at Oregon State, the situation that he was in was ideal for the time that he was there, where you lead Oregon State to really its best 2-year run in 20 years. It's Chad Johnson, TJ Hushmanzada, and you're in this golden era of your program. Yet at the same time, while all this is happening, it becomes painfully obvious that you probably need to leave that job because your program, your alma mater, was left without a home after the implosion of the Pac-12. Those are things outside of your control. Pac-10, Pac-12, whatever you want to call it at different points. but it was technically the implosion of the Pac-12. So I think that's what gets put on the wow, why am I blanking? Gravestone.
Yeah. Wow, that's eulogizing. That's the Pac-2. I was just kidding because there's like 2 of them left, but yeah.
Oh yeah, Pac-2, Tupac, we like to call it. Yes,
there obviously. We go.
Yeah. So he takes the Michigan State job that is good, but not even the best job in that state, whether Michigan State people want to admit it or not. And I realize they have a ton of financials with billionaires that are in their pockets, and that's all well and good. But at the same time, it's a good, not great job. The motivation for him is very clear that even if you're a casual college football fan, you can kind of understand he's going to the Big Ten, which along with the SEC has become the destination for coaches. The increased playoff bids that are coming in 2026 that are very likely coming, that's one thing, as is the fact that those payouts are expected to be $21 million per each school. That's just the playoff payout that we're talking about here. That's more than 4 times the previous number each school in the Power 5 conference got during the 4-team playoff era. The other conferences like the ACC, they're going to be making $13 million per school from that playoff contract, and the Big 12 will be at $12 million. So that's a significant advantage just with the playoff alone, and then you factor in the automatic bids that are likely going to come. Poor Group of 5, looking at some of this stuff, man, the Group of 5 goes from $1.5 million annually per school to $1.8 million per school. And there won't even be a participation bonus anymore.
Oh, guys, this was about the little guy. That's why we expanded. Y'all know UCF got left out, and now it's fair. Before it was unfair, now it's fair.
Yeah, about that. Look, at the same time, though, you had one team in of the 40 that you had during the 10 years of the 4-team playoff era. So getting any money, in a way, I guess that should be a win. But yeah, not great for the Group of 5. The gap's widening. That's what I'm saying. The gap is widening. There's more motivation now than ever before to have one of those 34 jobs that are either in the Big Ten or the SEC. If it is Power 2, which some people are saying that Core 4 isn't good because it's Power 2, I heard you. I was offended. I wanted more people to be on board with the Core 4. I'm still on board with the Core 4. I get if you want to call it the Power 2, but that's obviously what the conversation seems to be trending toward. It doesn't mean that every job in the Big Ten and the SEC is better than every other job outside of it and that they are all destination jobs. I don't think that's the case, nor does it mean that every coach will leave a job outside of one of those conferences to join one in either the Big Ten or the SEC. If that were the case, Mike Norvell would have said, yes, Alabama, I will be your next head coach. I am getting out of Dodge. I am getting out of the ACC as soon as possible. That didn't happen. We don't have a bunch of these coaches that are making these lateral moves all over the place. They still look like reasonable moves. Even a Jonathan Smith situation, you understand the dynamics that can go into it. But this is about leaving the SEC. That's what we're talking about today. The stat that shows why the SEC is king is one of my favorites to be able to reference, because I think the average person looks at all the coaching turnover in the SEC and says, man, they just don't have that foundation. They struggle with that in the way that other conferences do. But will the last SEC coach to leave the conference for another head coaching job at the college level, that is outside of the SEC, was James Franklin leaving Vandy for Penn State at the end of the 2013 season. Okay?
Yep.
That's a guy leaving the toughest job in the SEC, bar none. No debate about it whatsoever. He is leaving the toughest job in the SEC to return to his home state to restore one of the more proud programs that we have in all of college football, albeit one that was going through stuff at that time. Just stuff. We'll leave it at that. To recap, we just had 10 seasons of the 4-team playoff era, and not a single SEC coach left for a job in another conference. That's telling. And yeah, there were moves within the conference, like Dan Mullen leaving Mississippi State to go to Florida, but that's not necessarily going outside of the conference. That's the point. And sure, you can count Lincoln Riley bailing on the idea of going into the SEC to leave for USC. I get it, but he wasn't leaving an SEC job at the time, especially when we didn't really know end of the 2021 season how soon it was going to be that Oklahoma was going to be able to join the SEC. So I don't really think that you can say that that's him leaving the SEC per se. It also doesn't count to say that a fired coach, gets another job elsewhere. Mark Richt gets fired at Georgia and then he goes to Miami. That's not leaving for a job in another conference. That's getting fired and then leaving for another job after the fact. We're talking about
Yeah.
willingly going away, having an SEC program that says, dang, our coach just got poached by someone outside of the conference. Because in the SEC, you're either getting fired or you're getting extended. And I know what you might be thinking. Connor, isn't it pretty rare for Power 5 conferences to get their coaches poached? Yeah, it's pretty rare, but it still happens. It still happens. During the 14 playoff era alone, Alabama poached Kalen DeBoer from Washington. LSU poached a certain Brian Kelly from Notre Dame. Mississippi State poached Mike Leach from Washington State. We had Texas A&M poaching not one, but two coaches from power conferences because Jimbo Fisher left Florida State for Texas A&M, and then Mike Elko just left Duke for Texas A&M. Since Lane Kiffin bolted from Tennessee to USC on January 12, 2010, James Franklin is the only SEC coach who willingly left the conference for another head coaching job. Okay? That's crazy to think about. That was 14 years ago, more than 14 years ago that Lane Kiffin did that. Since then, we've seen it just doesn't happen. And cliche be damned, it does just mean more when you realize that 7 of the 10 highest paid coaches in the sport from the SEC. That's all you need to know right there. That's half the league that was part of the $9 million club that we talked about a lot at this time last year. And that includes the guy who was so bad at his job that he got paid $76 million not to work because the idea of just praying that someone would step in and poach Jimbo Fisher didn't really exist for A&M, unlike Kentucky with John Calipari, who took a job at Arkansas that was vacant because Eric Musselman did the thing that SEC football coaches never do, and he left the SEC for a job outside of the conference. SEC basketball, it isn't SEC football. Nothing is SEC football. There is one and one only, at least when it comes to sports on American soil. I know what else you're thinking. Connor, never's a long time. Never say never. Maybe there were times when it felt like it could have happened, where an SEC coach would have willingly left for a job in another conference. Some thought, incorrectly, that Brian Kelly to Michigan had a little juice behind it. I beg to differ on that. Or we thought a couple years ago, hey, Josh Heupel, Shane Beamer, going to leave their jobs for Oklahoma at a time when they were still technically playing in the Big 12. That would have been murky, but it didn't end up happening. There are situations where it could still happen. Stoops didn't leave for Florida State, a job that I'm told was never his, for the taking at least.
No one's job is ever anyone's until they're hired. It's the funniest thing in the world. It's like, we came out of the heavens and Kalen DeBoer came to Alabama. Y'all didn't even think about Dan Lanning. I didn't give him a call. Okay.
Yeah. Dan Lanning got a call. No way Dan Lanning didn't get a call.
I'm here to tell you Stoops probably got a call too. Now, if that didn't materialize, fine. But the concept of everyone just be like, that was never a thing. Yeah, man. Because it works for both of you to say that. That's why it was never a thing.
Florida State viewed those 20 minutes of hopping on the phone with me to tell me that as important for them, and to not say that Mark Stoops was offered the Florida State job. So, okay, we have it on record. Florida State did not offer the job to Mark Stoops. It didn't happen. Okay, that's what we know. But I've outlined before when we talked about Stoops, how long he has at Kentucky. We've outlined the idea of him going back to his alma mater, going to Iowa. Would that make sense if Kirk Ferentz decided to ever retire? Maybe. Maybe there's a situation like Eli Drinkwitz getting a big-time job somewhere down the road. But maybe there's a situation more than any of those that this could really be put into play. Something that we've talked about already this offseason, the agent of chaos, Ohio State. If that job opens up, it would be unlike anything that this streak has endured during the 14 playoff era of SEC coaches not leaving for jobs outside of the conference. More so than Florida State or Miami, both of which opened up multiple times during the 14 playoff era, more than Notre Dame opening up, more than Michigan opening up multiple times during the 14 playoff era. Ohio State has alignment in ways that coaches dream about. And it's going to be fascinating if that's going to be put to the test with coaches that are in really good standing at solid programs. That recruiting alignment, the facilities, the resources, they are all there. You look at their current roster, a very win-now team and the way that it was assembled, and you see that alignment through and through, even with an athletic director that just walked through that door after paying a coach $76 million to go away, not out of Ross Bjork's pocket, but you get what I'm saying. Ohio State didn't necessarily poach Urban from Florida, so we can't really count that because he had his gap year, of course, as Urban does.
Mm-hmm.
But that net, if it is cast, it will be far and wide, and it will definitely go into SEC borders, at least to see if that's a potential fit. But outside of that, well, I find myself wondering, man, like, when is the next time which we could actually see a coach leave the SEC? And not just, leave the SEC for a job in the NFL, the Jim Harbaugh thing or something like that, but go, that job outside of this conference is good enough to where I feel I need to take it and sign up for that type of opportunity. With the sports dynamic, the way that they are, the way that these dynamics are set up, they are giving the SEC an even more favorable path to entry. That's path to entry for national championship. That's resources that are getting taken care of on that side, which makes it seem like there has never been less sense to go sign up for an ACC job, knowing that the grant of rights still exists, or going to the Big 12, where, yeah, you might have a favorable path to the playoff, but if there are clear disadvantages with the TV money, with the playoff money, all that stuff, good luck. Congratulations. Besides, think about this. What jobs in the Big 12 could actually poach an SEC coach right now? I mean, seriously. Go up and down. The SEC just poached the 2 Big 12 schools who could actually do that.
Yep.
TCU or Texas Tech coming into the SEC and stealing one of those coaches? No. There's I just don't see that type of thing happening. We're living in a world in which Ole Miss and Kentucky are paying their head football coaches $9 million annually. I mean,
whoa. Ole Miss isn't paying their head coach that.
My bad.
The state of Mississippi will have you know.
They are making sure that their head coach, you know what? Kiffin has to put on his taxes, though, that money. So as long as it's considered that from an income standpoint, and if USA Today is tracking it that way, I'm going to say it's $9 million. Lane's getting his $9 million. That's all that really matters. Think about this, though. The Big 12 last year, they had 2 coaches in the $7 million club. One of which was Mike Gundy at $7.6 million. He's a man. He's 40. He's actually 50 now. Yeah, he's 50.
Yeah.
The other was Brent Venables, $7.1 million, now in the SEC. So take that for what it is. Sam Pittman would have been the 3rd highest paid coach in the Big 12 last year. And I remember writing after Pittman got his new deal after the 21 season, this guy actually got a really nice incentive-based deal. You know, I thought that the Jimmy Sexton move was going to all of a sudden just create this ridiculous deal that Arkansas would potentially regret down the road. And you're like, nah, it's really incentive-based. And we're talking about how it's got some upside there for Arkansas. That would have been the 3rd richest contract in the Big 12 among coaches. That's nuts. I mean, look at that. When you pull up the USA Today database, which I recommend anybody that's listening to this to do, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about and how unbelievably skewed at the top it is, and how there's leagues that are operating under one financial umbrella, and then there are leagues that are operating under an entirely different financial umbrella. That's just what reality has become. Arkansas was really at the forefront of this whole poaching conversation, at least in terms of the modern era, the last 15 years that we're talking about here. I think the Brett Bielema move. Brett Bielema move. We're keeping it. I should just shorten it to that. That move after 2012 was something that I think made people reevaluate what coaches look for and what stability actually means and what alignment means. He was a coach in a perfectly good situation, at least to the outside, at Wisconsin, a place where you could win X amount of games every single year, go to a Rose Bowl every few years, have unbelievable running backs, have a pretty obvious recruiting base, fan support, all that stuff. And he saw, you know what? I have this barrier to entry. I don't like that I don't have enough money to be able to pay assistants. I don't like that. And that's what it looks like when you don't have alignment. And a decade later, Wisconsin is now a program that, at least from the outside, looks like it has that alignment, because it poached a soon-to-be Big 12 coach in Luke Fickell, one that we have said, one of the 10 best coaches in the sport, someone I took in my non-SEC head coach draft, and someone that I think a lot of people have great respect for. His Wisconsin deal would have been the highest paid of any Big 12 coach. I mean, think about that. That's the type of money that we're talking about. And oh, by the way, it would have been second to Dabo in the ACC. That's how
They're
rich.
all second to Dabo in the ACC.
Yeah, this is true. Literally everybody is at this point. The Big Ten, with increased resources, has turned into a conference that can actually poach like the SEC, as we saw with the aforementioned Jonathan Smith. But even the Big Ten lost Kalen DeBoer to Bama. Do we count that? Do we count Chip Kelly leaving a soon-to-be Big Ten program to take an assistant job at Ohio State? Okay, he's staying within the conference. We won't count that.
I think if we don't count Lincoln Riley, we can't count those guys either.
Fair. Okay. So Jeff Brom leaving Purdue for his alma mater, Louisville.
Yep.
Something that just happened. Still very rare, though, in the Big Ten. I think before that, if I'm not mistaken, I think I have this right. Before that, the last such instance of a Big Ten coach getting poached for a job outside of the conference, Gary Anderson leaving Wisconsin for Oregon State, which was one of those head-scratching moves at the time that you're just like, what in the world is going on? And Wisconsin has since learned from those issues. And it doesn't mean they're going to keep Luke Fickell forever. Again, if this Ohio State job opens up, buddy,
Right.
just buckle up. It's going to be fascinating. But it's not happening in the Big Ten and the SEC because they're richer than everyone else. And as that number widens right now, with the sport having what feels like a power two, a true power two, it feels like the odds are even less likely that one of those teams gets poached by another conference. It just seems rare that we're going to see that in this new era of college football. But maybe we see some of that movement within the two conferences, and that's maybe more so the conversation. What these Big Ten and SEC, these conferences are trying to do right now. It's just not something that should be taken for granted. All right, go ask Florida State, Oklahoma, Notre Dame, Washington, Oregon, Oregon State, Arizona, Duke, Purdue, Cincinnati. Go ask them what it's like, because that memory is still fresh, and I bet it stings. I bet it stings badly to have a coach poached. I don't know when an SEC fan base will be able to empathize with that anytime soon. I really don't. It doesn't mean that it can't happen. It just means that the SEC has isolated itself so well that it'll feel like such an extremely rare occurrence if it ever does happen with the way that the sport is set up right now.
So I fully disagree with you, but I wanted to have a little mini thing.
Yes, let's go. Let's go.
Yes, I wanted to, have a little mini pitch me. That's all really good stuff. You did sway me to a degree, right? But I think my point stays fundamentally the same, which is this, right? At some level, these are all human beings with different priorities, right? So, and we're talking about never. Now, it's going to be, if it happens, it's going to be very, very, very unlikely, right? But I'll give you a couple of examples, okay? Now, first off, we pretty much, for this to be true, we pretty much just have to take Vandy off the board. Because if, like, a Big 12, I think so. Because the situation that Clark Lee is in right now, if he has another 3 or 4 win season and Texas Tech calls him and is like, hey, dude, get on out of there. We can give you a mutual parting of ways situation. You don't have to get fired by your alma mater. You can go over here and just hang out, get your reputation back, and go get ready for another job. But I think that's incredibly possible.
How likely is it that he's going to be in good enough standing to get something like that, where Texas Tech would want to take the Vandy coach in that spot? That's what I'm saying, is that James Franklin is the rarity, the guy who parlayed that into a great opportunity.
Right.
Is it likely that Vandy is routinely a stepping stone program moving forward, or is it more likely the deck is more stacked against that program than it was even when James Franklin was there?
Oh, I mean, imagine though, it even makes more sense if you're a small, if you're Cincinnati or something, and you're like, hey man, we think Clark Lee is smart. He just doesn't have the horses to win at Vandy. Let's get him out of there. Give him a fresh start. Hey, Clark, this is about to end badly, man. And I would say this too, look at the Calipari situation, right? I know basketball is different, but that's a situation where if you had told me that was going to happen before this season, we would have all been completely shocked, right? But at the end of the day, these are proud men. These are proud individuals, right? And sometimes there are things at a point that are more valuable than money. And your name, your reputation, I think, is one of those things. Calipari knew he was going to be a lame duck. He was going to be dumped on by the fan base, that his life was going to be hell for the next year until he could prove them wrong. And if he couldn't, it would be even worse. He was heading towards a very specific episode of The Twilight Zone, where he was going to have to fight all of his demons at once. He looked at an Arkansas job that was nowhere near objectively the status of Kentucky. And when, you know what, I go over there and I'm a god king. I stay here and I'm a goat in the old sense, right? I'm the goat of the game. Everybody hates me. And I think that's going to become more and more possible as these salaries and these expectations start to move up, because every time a guy loses a game, we see, Michigan State's paying Mel Tucker X, Y, and Z to lose this game before he got fired, obviously. So let me give you another example, okay?
Wait, real quick, can I respond to that?
Yeah. Oh, by all means.
The Calipari situation still is dependent on three different things happening at the same time. It has a coach who does not have alignment with the support on the back end, or at least how he deems that support should be available. We talked about, like, he's like, I had to do all this pitching, with boosters and stuff like that. I do this all myself, and boosters wouldn't go to bat for me. A situation he put himself in because of those bridges that were burned. You had a team that did not necessarily want to retain him, which is an important part of this.
Right.
And then another team that was interested enough in Arkansas that just had their coach poached, that wanted to be able to go out and make that type of statement to try and maintain that relevance and to say, hey, this is better than anything we've been able to even think about getting on the open market. And let's have all of these three things hit at the exact right time. In that situation you brought up is super, super rare. So what I'm saying isn't that can't happen. It's that you can't predict anything like that happening in the future. And it hasn't happened from a football standpoint, because if you're in good enough standing by the outside perspective, then chances are you're getting taken care of from that program from within. And that's why we talk about alignment being so important.
I mean, but that was the Brian Kelly situation, right? Like, obviously Notre Dame's a very specific case, right? But
not the SEC. Not the SEC. That's the point.
Right. But I'm saying, like, he was at this point where he was at his dream job. He was the winningest coach in Notre Dame history, the winningest program in college football history. He had done all of this, right? But he was looking around, and like you said, he was just frustrated. He felt like he was running into the wall. He felt like no matter what he did, it wasn't good enough. He felt like getting to the playoff wasn't enough. Yep. And so I think that's the key, is the slow attrition, wear and tear of some of the most competitive people you'll ever see. In that, we imagine, money line go up good, and I'll say this to you. It's like, okay, let's say this is obviously, well, no, we can just do a theoretical. Let's say that, like, the Athletic called you tomorrow and was like, Connor, listen, I'm going to give you, $200,000, dude, but you need to work 7 days a week for the rest of your life.
Yeah, we've talked about this. Who said they aren't doing that right now? No, I'm just kidding.
Right. No, right. But you see what I'm saying, right? And I'm not going to like ask for a real answer there, but it's the fact of, like, at a point, right? Lauren gets tired of it. You start missing stuff with Claire. You start looking around, and that's the environment we're creating in the SEC, where everywhere in college football, coaches are looking around going, I don't want to spend 7 days of the week missing my kids, T-ball games. Like, Kirby Smart does that stuff. He goes and does the travel ball stuff because he's winning, right? But if we saw Sam Pittman at one of those little travel league games, the internet would be on fire. It would be like, Sam Pittman, you should be at work. You shouldn't be at this T-ball game. You got all this stuff going on, da-da-da-da. And so point being, like, these coaches have no personal lives. And you know how it goes as, like, a married man, like, with a daughter. It's like, sometimes things become more important. So that's my only thought, is that, number one, a mutual parting of ways where things start to sour. And like I said, I use the Clark Lee example because it could be, okay, you might be on the way out, things aren't going your way. Let's leave with dignity. And then the other part of it is you just kind of look up and go, hey, like, I'm at one of these jobs, like, like, let's say you're Lane Kiffin or something, and you got to extrapolate 3 years down the road, right? Couple years where it's like, maybe I'm not on top of the world. Maybe I'm just coming off of a 8 or 7 win season, and I've said exactly. I mean, look at Dabo, man. Look what Dabo's going through right now, where he got everything under the sun he wanted. He backslid, and the fans are turning on him. Same thing with Calipari. And you look around and you're saying, look, I built this place. These fans aren't grateful to me. You guys used to be out here like, daboing and blowing these games, and now we've won championships, and you're not grateful to me. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's so possible in the SEC, where everyone has championship expectations. Like, Ole Miss fans now have championship expectations. Texas, Oklahoma, all these different schools are coming in with championship expectations, and these coaches are like, yo, man, like, we can't all win the championship. In fact, if there are 10 of us here with that, it's likely over half of us will never win one. And we're probably going to end up being chased out of town. And so I think when you start to head toward that messy divorce, like you talked about, maybe not the Purdue situation, but the Scott Satterfield situation at Louisville, where it's like, we're just unhappy with each other. I'm going to take a lateral move. And in the SEC case, it's like, I could take a pay cut, but take a quality of life increase where I'm only working 6 days or 5 days out of the year. I'm moving off of recruiting, getting the 5 stars. I'm not living and dying by every recruit. My system is enough. Like a Dan Mullen's a great example, guy that just was not built for this conference, but could be great elsewhere. You know what I'm saying? If he was at Florida that last year, and like I said, Texas Tech, you know, with their AD calls and says, hey man, you don't have to recruit here. These fans are not going to kill you. Just get out of there, man. I'm not telling you he wouldn't have taken that job.
I think those coaches get fired before that happens, though. That's my point. They get that
That's
buyout
fair.
money.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you're right, because I think the Chip Kelly thing kind of makes you aware of coaches that want to plan their next move. They want to kind of get out ahead of it. You know, there are different examples, not just within college football, of coaches that have kind of seen the writing on the wall and thought, I just want to get out of this. And you could all point to, though, them not necessarily being in great alignment with their athletic director, with the boosters, and how that got to that place. I think so many SEC programs, despite the crazy expectations that come with these jobs, have that. And they recognize when it's working. And so we can hear this stuff thrown out as leverage all the time, but it's different when that actually needs to happen, and you actually need to get that coach extended, and you actually need to make sure, okay, are they living up to this contract that they signed? And athletic directors will pull the trigger because they can. And they don't have to necessarily sit here and debate whether or not, they have enough buyout money to pay this coach or that coach or that coach. It's there. And so instead of having that lame duck, very, very often in the SEC, you just say, you know what, we're going to move on. Yeah, Dan Mullen, I get that you took us to 3 New Year's Six Bowls. You became the first coach to ever start off their time with consecutive New Year's Six Bowl victories. We get that you did all of that for us. And Scott Strickland still looked at that situation in year 4 and said, you know what? We need to move on. I don't want this here anymore. We can't have this mutual parting of way. No. Let's just pay the $12 million. Let's be done with that. Let's move on. That's the rip the Band-Aid approach that you see in the SEC that you don't see everywhere else, not even in the Big Ten. And when you have the money to be able to do that, I just think it kind of changes that dynamic, and it makes it less likely that these coaches are ever going to get to that place where they're in good standing that they would seek greener pastures.
Now, this is a guy who's a little bit too headstrong to ever see this way, but I would argue that Billy Napier's in that situation right now, man. I mean,
but what job was he going for?
That's what I'm saying. He's a guy who thinks he's the guy, so he's going to stay there. But if another guy, and like I'll give you, and I know this isn't a head coach, but a great example is Denbrock. Like Denbrock had just won the Heisman as an offensive coordinator with LSU. He had just gotten a contract extension. He'd done all this. He's like, I just want to be near my family, dog. Like, I don't really want to be a head coach. I just want to do this. I know it's different for a coordinator, but like, that's a great example. Like everybody has different priorities. You know what I'm saying? And I mean, even like Liam Cohen coming back to Kentucky, you know what I'm saying? Like we see these guys move, and yeah, it's more common at the coordinator level, but it's like, there are probably, I'd say 3 to 4 now. There's so many moves every offseason. 3 to 4 where you're just like, that doesn't make dollars and cents. This guy just wanted to be there, you know?
So the Urban thing at Florida, let's bring it back to Florida.
Okay, yeah.
That's a good example, though, of kind of what you're talking about, but why it doesn't get to the place where he's going to leave for another job. And it's, oh my God, I can't handle the recruiting at this point.
Yep.
I'm stepping down, but I'm going to another job right now. Florida would never let that happen. There's no way they would have let the guy with 2 rings say, you know what, I just need to dial it back. They would beef up his support staff. They would be able to say, hey, we're going to have this coordinator take care of play calling duties. And I mean, they already have that. But you get what I'm saying. We'll give you whatever you possibly need to make this work here. We can't let you leave for another job. That approach has been so evident in this sport and in the SEC specifically to say we can't let that happen. We would rather get to the place where we get 2 or 3 more seasons out of you, and then we got to pay a buyout, as opposed to having somebody else come in and take you out from under us. You know, think about how many times the Miami job has opened up. And think about the different names that have been thrown out there, and it has never materialized. And I remember even writing after, I think it was after 21. Yeah, it was after 21. So they're about to get Cristobal, right? Which huge poaching in itself. Right. You're getting a Miami guy, you're going to Oregon, who was no stranger to having coaches poach because they don't pay as well as you think they do with that Nike money. But they at one point it's like, oh yeah, Lane Kiffin. Lane's going to leave Ole Miss for Miami. Is he? Because last I checked, they're going to the ends of the earth to make sure that they don't let that guy leave. They like everything that he's done, and they are bending state law to make sure that guy is paid because that's the SEC, Will. And Miami's out here like, hey, we should probably spend more on this football thing. It's not the 80s anymore. It's not the early 2000s. We should start spending like the rest of these programs. Kirk Herbstreit brought up some good points on College Game Day. That's the difference. That's the difference right there.
Yeah, no, you're right. And like as I'm looking at this, man, oh, that's why, because Miami's private. It's hard to tell what they're paying their guys on this. Yeah, so I was like, where's he? Yeah, because you're right, Dan Lanning, and this is like last year's list, so it's not been updated, which it's still kind of moving. But yeah, Lanning is not as high as you think. He's 19, and I'm sure he's got an extension. I'm sure it's more now. Yeah, especially with all the Alabama calls he definitely didn't get. I'm sure that had nothing to do with the extension. But point being, yeah, it's just like I would say like the Cristobal example is an interesting one where you can have like a guy who played somewhere or a guy who, because again, like you look at Oregon and you think they have all these resources, exactly what you said, but Miami just had a place in the guy's heart. Same as Denbrock, so I just would say it's hard to ever say never when you've seen these weird little one-offs where a guy will just take a job that we're all like, why does that make sense? And then we look at the guy and we're like, he's so happy. Like, look at him over there. I mean, Cristobal's not happy because he's, losing the GT and everything. But, like, point being, like, there are so many guys. Like, Braum is a great example, right? We talked about him a little bit. But it's like, he's just happy. And, like, sometimes guys, as guys get older or they start to even have, like, a health issue or they start to, like, oh, I'm really missing time with my kids. So that's the only thing. It wouldn't shock me if an SEC coach decided to do some kind of a mental health angle and was just like, I'm working too hard. We should all talk about the workplace. I'm going to Texas Tech.
Yeah, but that's the thing is like it's the year-round recruiting calendar is still going to follow you wherever you go.
Yeah, but the expectations won't. I think that's what it's about. Yeah, certainly, everybody says they're built for it or whatever. And like, honestly, I mean, this is going to sound weird at this point, but like DeBoer strikes me as that type of guy who could have this happen to him at some point too. You get to Alabama, you win 8 games, you win 9 games or whatever. The fan base is turning on you. You go, I really like my life up in Washington. People were happy with me. There was scenery. I wasn't getting stuff thrown at me. I'm just going to go somewhere else because he's an unconventional guy. Like, I could see that happening.
But does it get to that place before Bama steps in and says, yeah, we're just going to part ways with you? That's
well, that was the Nick Saban's chosen successor, so they can't turn on him.
I love Dan Lanning, too. Dan Lanning at Bama wasn't going to happen.
They'd be planting evidence on him like Tennessee. That's what they'd be doing. That's something we didn't talk about. Is the university could just do what Tennessee did and get you fired.
Shoot the moon, man. Look, it will go to the ends of the earth. That is kind of my point. Is that it's the least likely scenario of all the things that can happen after you're hired at an SEC program. Is you get poached for another job outside of this conference. You're either too bad to where you're getting that buyout money, or you're good enough to where you're getting that extension, that historically wealthy extension, and you're moving on. Like that's just the way that works. Or maybe it is the Dan Mullen situation where you're getting poached from a job that's perceived as better within the conference, and that's what your next step potentially looks like. So yeah, I just think it's one of those things that, like, man, I don't think SEC teams can take that for granted because everybody deals with it. Everybody deals with at least that scare, that threat. Think about all those schools when Saban steps down, and all those schools that had to worry, like, is our job good enough for our coach to make this a destination type job? Even Texas fans, as proud of a program as that is, in the back of their mind, got to be thinking, it's not 0%. It's at least out there in some capacity. And it's not to say that this means that it's 0 for everyone, but I think when it happens so infrequently, we do need to talk about why it is so rare and how it should continue to be more rare with the way the sport's set up.
And before we close out on this, I do want to say this. The one that might break this trend is if Dabo were to decide, like we've talked about, Dabo were to just walk away, where Clemson's sitting there with, like, they've already paid their head coach that much money, and they're just like, hey, Mark Stoops, how's it going, Yeah. But that's the only one. You're right. Like, if you're looking around at different destinations, there's only kind of like one place outside of the Power 2 that has that money. It is Clemson.
Yeah, the list is small. The list is
or SMU would be a good one, actually. Now that I think about this, SMU is weird. They actually would be a good case. I would put them second behind Clemson of, like, oh yeah, we're just gonna go grab, like, again, Clark Lee or somebody like that, give him a fat and make it look like a raise, and be like, hey, we raised all the Skip Bayless money. We're good. We're gonna do the Pody Access 2. We all won the press conference, boys. It would have to be something like that. They're like Larry Brown at SMU,
Yeah, essentially what they just did in basketball.
Yeah.
Andy Enfield.
Yeah, exactly.
The move that got everything going.
Yeah.
In the college basketball coaching carousel. Yeah, but again, we're talking about such specific situations.
Yep.
And yeah, conferences don't hire and fire coaches. I get all that. But at the
Yeah.
same time, it does feel like it would be such a one-off in order for that occurrence to ever align well enough for that to work. Okay. Let's kick it to another coach. Let's kick it to Shane Beamer. Great conversation with him, talking about everything that happened with the Spencer Rattler situation on draft night, the conversation around him, the reasons why it didn't work in 2023 for South Carolina, and some of the pieces they got coming back in 2024. Great conversation with Shane Beamer. So here he is. Now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is Shane Beamer. Shane, let's start with the obvious question here. I see you've been able to get out on the golf course. That is a beach tan, not a golf course tan. But the important thing that I've been wondering about for a while, how's the foot holding up throughout golf?
Foot's good. Fully recovered. Still a little sore, but foot is good for sure. So been able to get on the golf course a little bit and had a great event last week to raise money for charity with some other head coaches and enjoyed that and enjoying the month of May right now.
I didn't want it to hold you back. Look, we've all had those moments where we thought, how is this going to impact my golf game? And, that's the type of thing that can definitely come up. But you pulling your weight with Houston Nutt, it looked like you guys did all right, though. So that's the positive.
Yeah, no, we did. Loved playing with Coach Nutt. He was inspiring and was a great partner and leader that we needed in that group, and tied for first and got into a playoff and lost in a 4-hole sudden death playoff to Mike Norvell and Urban Meyer. So credit those two guys for finding a way to win. But as competitors, it stinks. I mean, Coach, we finished up that day about 2:00 in the afternoon. I think we got done playing 3:00. And that night, probably 8:00, Coach Nutt called me and just said, I'm still sick about us not winning, which I feel the same way. But it was a great event. The competitive juices got flowing, and a lot of money was raised for charity, which is the most important thing.
Okay, so my terrible transition was going to be, I wanted to personally kick a Gatorade cooler the second I heard Pete Thamel talk about Spencer Rattler in the NFL draft. See what I did there? And that's someone, look, I didn't have perspective of him like you did, obviously. Nobody does. I know that you voiced your frustration on social media, but kind of take me through what that was like on Friday to be able to see these outdated opinions come in, on national television.
Yeah, it was disappointing. I've been hearing this narrative, if you will, about Spencer Rattler since I was an assistant coach at Oklahoma. And he was a freshman coming into our program, that high school coaches back in, what would this have been, 2018, I guess, had an opinion of him because of something they saw on a Netflix show when he was a junior or sophomore in high school, whatnot. And then I saw the Spencer Rattler that in 2019 came in as a freshman, sat behind Jalen Hurts, and was a great teammate. I saw the Spencer Rattler that in 2020 was replacing Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts had been the last 3 starting quarterbacks for Oklahoma. He comes in and proceeds to, we as a team, but he is our starting quarterback, lose our first 2 games in the Big 12 that season to Kansas State and Iowa State. And I saw how he handled that. I saw how he handled getting benched that season in the Texas game by Coach Riley, but then Lincoln put him back in the second half. He led us to a 4-overtime win, and then we went on to win the Big 12. So I saw he handled all that. Then the way he handled himself coming in here to Oklahoma, or coming into South Carolina, was voted a captain of our football team twice by his teammates as well. So when I said that, it was frustrating because I had a bunch of NFL teams, call me about him, and leading up to the draft, and everything that I said about him was positive. And is he perfect? No, he'll tell you that, and has room to improve as a player. But he's a great teammate, comes from a great family, and it was just disappointing. And Pete Thamel, I don't think he made this up. And I told Pete that, he has a job to do. And if NFL teams were saying that to Pete Thamel, then, so be it. But shame on those NFL teams if they felt that way because they clearly didn't do their research if they did feel that way. And then I'm going to always defend our players, and I didn't like seeing a good kid's name kind of get dragged on national television on Friday night for something that is not him.
I think if we are looking at this objectively, we can all say, well, yeah, players are going to be scrutinized for everything that they do throughout their football careers. But, the thing is, if he had been a nightmare throughout his time in Oklahoma, there's no way that you would have brought him in to South Carolina for your second season there. You're still trying to establish the foundation. If you had just never recruited him to come to South Carolina, I don't think people would have connected the dots a few years later on draft night saying, hey, why didn't one of his former assistants at Oklahoma want him post Oklahoma? If that was the case, fine. Then we can talk. Then we can have that conversation. What's up? But correct me if I'm wrong here. It just felt like the exact opposite. And everything that I observed from you guys firsthand, everything that I had heard out of the program was that people like that guy a lot. And there are things that are said that are just so much different internally than externally.
Absolutely. His teammates liked him. Coaches liked him. He was a great teammate. He comes from a great family. He starts with his mom and dad. His mom and dad are awesome. He's very grounded. If his parents ever called me about anything, honest to God, it was to just thank me for the experience that Spencer was having at South Carolina, not to say, hey, Shane, we've really got some concerns about this or that or this. It was never any of that. And he was awesome. And his teammates obviously feel the same way because he was voted, like I said, a captain twice. And in my conversations with NFL teams, he did nothing but help himself with NFL teams this past season, dealing with some of the adversity that he had to deal with. I mean, he came back for another year in 2022 when he could have left early for the NFL draft after 21. We finished the season beating Clemson and Tennessee, and then he played really well in the bowl game against Notre Dame. He could have come out that year and gotten drafted, and he didn't. He came back, but then he didn't know coming back that he was going to lose an all-conference receiver that would basically never played last season for us. He didn't know that we were going to have 6 season-ending injuries on the offensive line and that we were going to start 2 true freshmen in the SEC for 10 games last season. But he had every reason. The normal guy could easily use that as an excuse, get frustrated, complain, whatever. It was the complete opposite with him, just the way that he handled that and lifted guys up around him. And I know that resonated with NFL teams, and that's what they told me, just the respect that they gained for him in that season and how he handled it. So I'm excited for him. I've had some NFL teams that called me last week just to say, we really liked him, and we were actually trying to trade up for him at times during the draft so we could pick him, but we just couldn't get the deal done and things like that as well. So in the end, he ended up where he was supposed to be. He's going into a great situation with New Orleans, and he'll be a great teammate in New Orleans, just like he was at the University of Oklahoma and just like he was here at South Carolina. And going back to what you said at the beginning too, when he did come here, I mean, obviously I had a lot of friends that were were on that Oklahoma staff because Lincoln hadn't taken the Southern Cal job, and I reached out to all those guys about, hey, Spencer, after he lost his job to Caleb, tell me about it. And it was all positive. It wasn't, he turned into some prick. He was a good teammate and handled it the right way. Was he upset? Sure. He was an undefeated starting quarterback that had just won a conference championship and lost his job in a game that they won. And when they were actually undefeated and ranked number 4 in the country, I think, when he got benched. So I understand he was frustrated, but he handled it the right way and was great here too.
I know there might be some people, if they really want to connect some dots, they might be thinking, hey, the Pete Thamel thing, he's the same guy that after SEC Media Days a couple years ago, he kind of called you out for the whole B-list SEC Network talent comment. But I watched you guys last year have a laugh about it. And I know you guys are good, so I don't want people thinking that was a thing too. But it's one of those things where, yeah, I would shoot him a text right after, be like, hey man, what did you not get the full side of the story here? You talk about that communication of having that after the fact. He's not getting up there in line. This is what he's being told. But what does that process look like? How much obligation as a head coach do you feel like you just want to run through a wall for your guy and say, hey, what you just said on national television, that might not have told the entire story of how this played out?
Yeah, I think that's it. I'm always going to defend my guys, and my point too was when I was saying the tired, lazy narrative. I mean, in general, it wasn't attacking Pete in my mind. It was this narrative that may just be out there with NFL teams that didn't call me or didn't do their research on a guy, or who is. I don't know who Pete's talking to. Is he talking to a head coach or a general manager? Is he talking to some scouting intern that's trying to break into the profession? I don't know, but just do the research. And again, I know Pete didn't make it up and report a story, but it's also understanding that there's a lot more to it than that. So he had a job to do, and again, I understand he has a job to do. But if anybody in the NFL felt that way about Spencer, then they didn't do their research in my mind, because people, if they talk to people here in this building, it would have been nothing but positive coming out of there as well. And look, I got respect for Pete Thamel, and he's done it for a long time and whatnot as well. And that was a narrative that was out there, but it was frankly tired and lazy a narrative because it's not accurate. And if you spend any time around Spencer Rattler, you know that.
Okay, so I've talked to you each of the last, I guess this is post year 3. I've talked to you after each of your off seasons. And, I remember thinking last year after I followed you at SEC Media Days, like it's kind of crazy how much the word momentum was brought up. Everybody was talking about, beating Tennessee, beating Clemson. And if I had had a shot for every time that word was addressed in one of your interviews, I mean, I would have been blitzed that day. But, you mentioned how that was so important in getting support and being able to get people to kind of buy into the program. It's important on the back end and for what you guys are trying to build, but it didn't guarantee anything. And you kind of saw that play out looking back on the season that you guys had. Why did 2023 come up short of those expectations? And I guess, why weren't you able to build on that proverbial momentum, or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, I'm never a guy that wants. I tell our team all the time, like, we're not going to seek comfort and make excuses and things like that as well. So I don't want to be a hypocrite in saying this, but I knew going into the season that we had a really good team. We had a good group of guys coming back. And anytime you have a NFL quarterback returning like we did in Spencer, and a lot of key pieces from the 2022 team returning, there should be some momentum going into the next year. I also knew that depth-wise, we weren't quite where we needed to be overall, just from a depth standpoint. And we were kind of in that year last year in a lot of ways where we had some really good players that Coach Muschamp had left behind, to carry on Joyner and those guys. And then we had some really good young players that had come in that were good but needed to develop as well. And I knew we had a chance if we could just stay healthy for the most part. We'd be okay from a depth standpoint. But if we had injuries, it was going to be a challenge. And frankly, that's what happened. I mean, we had 12 season-ending injuries last year to key contributors, and whether it be Mo Kaba, our linebacker for us, who tears an ACL covering a kickoff in the first kickoff of the UNC game, or Kaysen Henry, who's our starting right tackle and gets his leg rolled up on, I think, on the third play of the UNC game, and he's out for the year essentially. We ended up having to start 2 true freshmen on the offensive line, and we started 5 true freshmen overall. So from a health, depth, injury standpoint, that was a big factor, particularly in this league, because it wasn't like games where we were just getting our brains beat out. We had a chance to win every game, going into the fourth quarter. Now, some more so than others. I'm not saying that every game we had going into the fourth quarter was a 1-score game, because it was not, but you felt confident going into the fourth quarter. You had an opportunity to win every game, and we just couldn't get over the hump in a lot of those games. I'm proud of the way that we finished. We won 3 out of 4 down the stretch. We certainly did not play well in our very last regular season game. And I'm not sitting here saying, well, we went 5-7 because of injuries. That was a factor, but there's a lot of stuff that you got to look at, starting it with me as a head coach, that we didn't do a good enough job of. And we didn't do a good enough job running the ball. That's part of the reason we were 5-7. We didn't do a good enough job protecting the quarterback. That's part of the reason we were 5-7. We gave up way too many explosive passes on defense last season. That's part of the reason we were 5-7. We didn't make as many game-changing plays on special teams as we had the year before. Was part of the reason we didn't have the year that we wanted. I didn't coach well enough. It starts with me. So it's one of those things. We weren't good enough, but also you don't want to sit there and just blow the whole thing up. You realize how close you were in some things as well. If we lose to Florida by, I think, 2 points in October, or we play a little bit better on offense in the last game against Clemson, the narrative's completely different. We find a way to get into a bowl game. We overcame all these injuries. We go to our third straight bowl. Maybe you win the bowl game, you finish with 7 wins, and now there's great momentum going into 2024. We didn't get that done, but I'm also not going to lose sight of we were close to getting over the hump. By no means is it good enough, but it was a great reset for me to take a step back and look at everything that we're doing, continue to build on things that we're doing, but also say, you know what, we now have a 3-year body of work that tells us we're not quite where we need to be in these areas, and it's my job as the head coach to fix that and feel like we've done those things.
What'd you learn about yourself?
Great question. I don't know how much I'll learn, because we faced adversity in 2021 at times. We faced adversity in 2022 at times. I really just learned about the people around me. I got really good people around me. We continued to battle. I mean, we were sitting there 2-6 at one point, and found a way to respond and win 3 out of 4 down the stretch and get ourselves in position to get in a bowl game. Continued to learn that knew this already, but as the leader, as the head coach, all eyes are on me. And it wasn't easy last year when you have some of the adversity that we face with injuries and youth and tough losses and things like that. It was a very challenging year from that standpoint, but really probably just realizing that every year is truly starting over. And I knew it, and I told our team that all the time. I mean, we had that great finish to 2022, like I talked about, beating Tennessee and Clemson, and then that was in November. And then 6 weeks later, when January comes around to start the 2023 season, that first team meeting that we have in January of 2023, there's like 40 new players in that room, either freshmen, transfers that weren't even here in 2022. So that's a third of your team. We're allowed to have 120 players on our roster. So 1/3 of our football team weren't even here when we beat Tennessee and Clemson. And now we had a lot of returners. We had two-thirds of our team coming back, don't get me wrong, but really just illustrated to me, which I already knew, but even more magnified it. Just, you can't just assume anything from year to year. It's truly starting over. And it doesn't matter if these players have heard me give this same speech 3 years in a row. Say it 3 years in a row, because there's a third of the team that hasn't ever heard me say it, and it's still important. So probably learn that more than anything. Just don't assume anything. And we didn't. It's not like I sit here and said, okay, we're going to be good in 23 because we were good in 22. I knew it was starting over, and we tried to be better, but we didn't quite be good enough, and we've had to tweak some things. And excited about kind of where we are going forward now.
I want to talk about LaNorris, because he comes in my opinion, one of the most intriguing players in the SEC, and not just because he rocks the rec specs like my favorite athlete of all time, Horace Grant. That's a huge positive for him. But I know you haven't named a starter yet, but you see what he's capable of in that spring game. What is your evaluation of him, and what is he capable of being in this offense?
Well, first of all, I love the Horace Grant shout out. I was a big Bulls fan growing up myself as well. And him, BJ Armstrong, and all the unheralded Bulls back in the day. LaNorris has been fantastic. I like that quarterback room, LaNorris, and he's in there competing with Robbie Ashford right now, transfer from Auburn. Luke Doty returns for another year in our program, and Davis Bevel's come in. Dante Reno's a freshman. But I think the thing with LaNorris is he's not your typical freshman. He's very poised. Nothing rattles him. He's just steady. And he's kind of one of those guys that the bigger the moment, the calmer he is, which is an awesome quality to have in a quarterback. And he just seems that any time he's gotten in a situation under the lights, so to speak, he's done really well, whether it be in our spring game. He was, very poised and efficient. Last season, he got in and played against Furman and Vanderbilt at the end of games and performed very well. We used him kind of in a wildcat role against Kentucky last year, which was a very big game for us in November at home. He performed well in that. So he's a great young man, very grounded, awesome family, talented, has really worked to become a really good quarterback since he got here. And he's just a winner. So I'm excited about the future with him, excited about Robbie Ashford and what he's brought to our program as he continues to get in there and battle in that room with all the other quarterbacks, LaNorris included, and excited to see kind of how we continue to shape that room and shape the offense this season.
When would you like to have a starter named by?
I think it's important. We met with I met with every quarterback coming out of spring practice, or I met with every player coming out of spring practice, and told all those quarterbacks, LaNorris included, and Robbie, that coming out of spring practice, LaNorris is our starting quarterback coming out of spring practice. But competition is a core value of this program, and now it's LaNorris's job to continue to earn that job and hold on to it. And we'll give Robbie every opportunity to compete. But, competition in our program is ongoing. I mean, we've got two fantastic safeties, and Nyck Harbor and DQ Smith, that both were freshman All-Americans. Well, they came in 2022, and the starting safeties were both seniors. And Nyck and DQ had both became the starting safeties by game 2 or 3 as well. So the competition every week, the guys that give us the best chance to be successful. I like in the summertime a team kind of being able to rally around one guy in the summertime, and then certainly as you get into 2 weeks out before your first game and all that as well, it's very evident. Here's who your starters are at each position, but understanding though that the competition never stops.
Everyone wants to see Nyck Harbor kind of take that year 2 jump after he got a lot more snaps really latter half of last season. But, I know it's tough to be able to kind of juggle what his role is going to look like when he's got those track duties in the spring. But when Bruce Feldman puts a guy at number 1 on his freaks list before he ever plays a college game, that kind of tells you all you need to know about him. What's the freakiest thing that you've seen him do, perhaps outside of running the 100 in 10-1-6, whatever he just did?
Cool. Great question. Probably just the everything he does to me is freaky. Just the way that he can, his size, his speed. I went and watched him run a track meet in person back in February at an indoor meet, and he's out there doing very, very well. And his head track coach came over to me, and he's like, "Yeah, we're just kind of, he's very rusty and raw right now." And I'm like, "God almighty, rusty and raw." Like, I'd hate to see what not rusty is compared to how good he looked right there running it. And he's like, "We're just going to continue to build him up for outdoor season where he can really take over." So that was like an eye opener to me as well. Watching him run on television when he was a senior in high school, I think it was up in New York City against professional sprinters. They're the best in the world, and he sat in there and held his own when he was a senior in high school, and obviously didn't have the training they did. But I think the thing that stands out about Nicholas is just his genuineness. I mean, he's very appreciative. He's grateful to be here. He's very humble, and he's a big kid in so many ways. I mean, he wanted to. Probably one thing just kind of shows you his mindset and how talented he is. He didn't really do much with us in spring practice because he is full speed ahead on track right now. But he called me the night before the spring game and was adamant that he wanted to play in the spring game. And this was going to be 3 hours after I think he set a personal record for a race in a track meet across campus here in Columbia. So he wanted to run in the race and then come over and play in the spring game that night. And he hadn't really practiced all spring, and I wouldn't let him just because I didn't think that was the best thing for him. Personally, and I wasn't about to get him hurt and cost our track team something. But the thing with him is he easily could have. I mean, because of his speed. We could have put him out there and thrown him a couple deep balls, and he would have wowed people as well as rusty as he might have been from a football standpoint if we had let him play.
I think fans see that speed and they go, why can't you just have that guy run go balls? He's faster than anybody on the field. Why is it not that easy to manufacture looks for him? And how much is that an increased priority of being able to try to tap into what he does best to make sure that it's not just a limited route tree and that he's more involved in the offense?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's not that simple. I mean, it's okay, teams are aware of his speed, so now do they play like too deep to that side and put a safety over the top where he's not going to be able to get past that safety? He's a bigger body, so do teams now try and get up in his face on the line of scrimmage and press him, jam him at the line of scrimmage so he can't get off the line? Because when you're a bigger body, when you're a bigger body, that's a challenge. And I can't imagine when he was playing high school ball up in D.C. that there were many DBs that got up in his face and wanted to press him as well. So those are all things that are things that he needs to work on, becoming a better route runner, working on his releases off the line of scrimmage, catching the ball, getting in and out of breaks, running after the catch. I mean, there's a lot to it, blocking and the perimeter blocking. And he's a tough kid, tough young man for sure. So those are all things that he'll tell you he needs to continue to improve on. Mike Furry, our new wide receivers coach who played in the NFL and coached in the NFL, he's going to do an amazing job with Nyck and already has of helping him continue to develop. But then it's also our job as coaches to help him with that also, because there is no question when he rolls in the game, teams better be aware of him because of his speed. Now, he's a build-to-speed guy. Some guys, those first 10 yards, they're on you. Other guys are a build-to-speed, and then they outrun you. Nyck's, in my mind, is more of a build-to-speed guy. That's one thing I've talked to the track coach about is let's get him really first 10 yards, let's continue to increase that. It's going to help him in track. It's going to help us in football. So we've got to continue to get him on the field, utilize him. I know he'll continue to work and fine-tune all those things. But we tried to do that even in game 1 last year against North Carolina, being able to just get him out there and just throwing deep balls, just the threat of him and attacking people downfield. We need to make defenses feel that, whether he's able to get open because of the coverage they're playing or not. They have to respect him being out there.
It's kind of crazy to think about him being in an offense wherein there's another guy with the name Rocket in it. And he's not the Rocket. Seeing Rocket Sanders hit the portal was a reminder of hey, nothing's guaranteed. The 2023 season that he had, just really frustrating, I know, from his perspective. But he kind of had his breakout game against you guys a couple years ago. When he hits the portal, how much does that factor into your mindset of God, I watched this guy just be incredible a couple of years ago. I need to get him on our side.
No, it does. Not just against us, but what he did after us too. You watch in the SEC, you're getting ready for teams every week, so you're watching other teams' offenses and defenses. So you see Arkansas on tape with whoever we're getting ready to play, Texas A&M, who we play every year, or Missouri, or whoever, and you saw what he was doing. So certainly you're aware of who Rocket Sanders is, even without what he did to us out in Fayetteville back in 2022 as well. And then you go back and you watch his tape where you're really watching him and not just the Arkansas offense or defense. You're going back and you're seeing some of the things he did as a running back at Arkansas, and it's so impressive. Not just running the ball, but catching the ball, pass protection, all that. But then you get around him and you talk to him and you find out about him as a person and see what a great guy he is and what an asset he would be to your program on and off the field. So he went in. It didn't take long. Thankfully, we had some connections with Dow Loggins, our offensive coordinator, who had been in Arkansas, Jameel Smith, who had been in Arkansas as the strength coach and is here now with us. Ryan Juracek, Hunter's son, who was out there and knew Rocket. So he has some connections here also, plus the opportunity for him to get closer to home. He's from Florida. It was a good situation for him, what we were offering, and then it was a great situation for us to be able to get him in here, and he's been awesome.
Last one for you. What does success look like in 2024? And look, I'm going to be honest with you. SC Media Days, I'm telling you the way that we're going to go about this from a media standpoint. You heard the word momentum thrown around by everybody you're going to hear bounce back. That's going to be the phrase that's very common. You're going to, by the end of the day, you're just going to be like, oh my God, if somebody says bounce back to me one more time, I'm just going to freak. But what does success look like for South Carolina 2024?
Maximizing the potential of this year's team and getting everything out of it. And frankly, last season, I don't feel like we did. And that's ultimately my responsibility. And even with some of the adversity that we faced, we did not maximize last year's team. And that eats at me and still bothers me. And it's my job to get that fixed and get that right. So to me, it's successful season is maximizing all the ability and the potential on this year's team. We got to maximize it and get the most out of it. It's going to be a challenge again. Obviously, we get to play a tough schedule. Excited about that. And we're going to have to rely on true freshmen in a lot of spots. So we're going to have to get those guys ready to play. One thing going back to last season is we relied on a lot of true freshmen. We ended up starting 5 of them. How can we get them acclimated even quicker to be even more successful earlier in the season than what we did last season as well with some of our preparation? So looking at all those things. But freshmen play well. We got a good group of older guys that are returning, particularly on defense up front. They've got to continue to lead the way. We got to continue to bring these young guys along and stay healthy and get the most out of this team. And if we do, I'm excited about what we can accomplish.
Okay, I lied. Last one for you. My daughter is showing major long snapping potential at 11 months old. She is 97% in height, 93% in weight. This is not a dad asking for a scholarship offer 17 years from now. Okay, this is not that. This is a dad asking someone who is very well versed in that area. In theory, if she could, if she decides to pursue a career in long snapping, it's going to be her choice. But if that door is open one day to be able to get some guidance, just get some pointers here and there, a little tip, little quick FaceTime video, something like that, if that's going to be available down the road with someone like yourself.
Absolutely. Glad to help the future generations of long snappers, and particularly if it leads to potentially coming to the University of South Carolina to do that as well. I'm all for it. And I would just say don't overcomplicate it. It's a similar motion to throwing. It's just you're doing it with 2 hands instead of 1. So don't overcomplicate it and continue to be a great athlete. But it's like if you can do it, though, it's a skill set that not many people can do. So take advantage of it.
That was the entire reason I wanted to have you on today. It was actually just for that. So this was.
I'm glad. Whatever else I can do, let me know.
Shane, I appreciate it, man. We'll do it again soon. Appreciate it.
Always. Appreciate you.
Lad of the week. I've got a last of the week. Pretty obvious one. Melinda Adams. If you don't know that name, you probably know at least the clip by now at this point. If you didn't see it, the ESPN producer, that is Melinda Adams, she was in one of the more awkward post-game press conference, not post-game press conference, but post-game locker room situations that you'll ever see after Pat Beverly basically just decided to act like an 8-year-old. So Pat Bev got into it with Pacers fans at the end of that game. He throws the ball at a fan. There's this back and forth, clearly like some sort of shouting match going on. And in the post-game locker room, Melinda tries to ask him a question, and he says, "Do you subscribe to my pod?" Which, look.
All right, Mr. Beast.
Yeah. I don't know if that's the move. Definitely not the move. She repeated his question and very politely said, "I do not." He says, "You can't interview me then." Pat Bev, none of this was surprising, nor was the fact that he continues to push the ESPN microphone away. And eventually she just walks away. She's like, "All right, this is stupid. It's cringe. It's really bad. It's awkward. It's a terrible look." We are in the podcast game. So we understand, sometimes, it's grind. Sometimes you do things to try and draw more attention to it, which that's what it seemed like Pat Bev was trying to do in this situation. Your season comes to an end. Maybe your career is coming to an end. You're looking to the next thing. I kind of get it from that perspective. I know it looks like a salty move, but he's apparently been doing this to the Milwaukee media. So this wasn't just a one-time deal. This has happened.
Is that better or worse, we feel?
Yeah. I think it's a little bit better.
It's honestly a good bit if you're familiar with it and if he's kidding, but if you just, I'm actually with you. Okay.
Yeah, maybe it's a little bit better. They didn't just single out one specific person. It was like, "Oh, I know that Melinda Adams doesn't listen to my pod. I'm going to call her out." Take that for what it is. She was the adult in the room, obviously, because instead of going scorched earth on basically anybody that enabled this situation to happen, Pat Bev, she didn't like call out other journalists. I know there was some pushback on that. Like, why didn't the other journalists just walk away? It's like, those moments are you're a little bit more focused, laser focused on kind of what's going on. It's not really the type of setting that you're like, I'm going to take a stand right now in this impulse decision. So I'll give them a pass for that. But she tweeted out that Pat Bev called her and apologized, which she accepted. Didn't have to accept it, but she accepted it. And the Bucks apparently called her, apologized as well. She tweeted, I've been in news for over 40 years and kindness and grace always win. Yep. That's a little preachy, but spot on, 100%. Like, she handled that like a pro. And that interaction, in my opinion, should be shown to journalism classes across the country, if those still exist, if there are still journalism classes, because you can't necessarily go to school to prepare to deal with a situation like that. But just having the foundation of kindness and grace while doing your job is something that I think we all need to be reminded of every now and then. And it was a situation that could have been so much more combative. I feel like we've seen situations like that where it's just been a weird offhanded remark directed at a specific reporter, and the reporter pushing back actually makes them look bad, even if they're in the right. And I thought this was a situation where Melinda was clearly just doing her job, like just literally there with a microphone. I don't even know if she was asking I don't even know what the question was that she was asking. So it wasn't anything offensive or I just don't know. But it was bad look for Pat Bev. Really, really bad look for him.
So, I got to ask you this question. So, what if that's you? Let me take Pat Bev out of it. Jermaine Burton, I feel like you tell him to bleep off. So, let's go like a George Pickens when you were covering him. Mercurial guy, fan favorite, but a little bit whatever. If George Pickens is like, all right, Connor, you subscribed to my podcast. What are you saying?
If he's asking me if I'm subscribed to his podcast?
Yeah, like, okay, if you start to ask him a question, he does the Pat Bev to you.
Saying, excuse me? That's so out of the realm of thought in that moment that I would have been more stunned than anything. I'd like to sit here and say that I would have a prepared response, but what?
So do you lie or do you say, no, I'm not subscribed is the real question?
Honestly, beta mentality. No, I don't just give in. I don't just give in and say, yeah, totally. Your episode today was fire, man. No.
I love those guests you have, man.
Dude, how do you get such high video quality for your stuff? Every YouTube video, man, just keep cranking out content. You're really doing well. No, in that moment, I'm probably just so stunned that somebody actually just asked me that. That's just never the give and take that you get in that setting. So I'm probably saying, okay. And then I just continue asking my question. Maybe I just walk away and give him a stink eye, which I think would be perfectly fine in that.
Not with Pat Bev, buddy, because that's the second craziest thing he did in about 5 minutes. You see him just beating those fans with basketballs?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like, yeah, the back and forth that he had there wasn't the best look. And so, like, you would think he's still heated coming off of that. Maybe he was, but the fact that he's been doing this in Milwaukee apparently is just an all-time
it's nuts,
weird, zero self-awareness type move. And I don't know that helped the pod numbers. He's trying to go the Draymond Green route. Good luck.
Draymond Green, back when he was cool, had one of my favorite quotes ever. Do you think he Kobe? This guy think he Kobe. Like, you're Pat Bev, dude. What do you think? Yeah, maybe if like Kevin Durant was like, hey, subscribe to Boardroom, we got like, Bill Gates coming on next week. I'd be like, okay, man, fine. But if it's Pat, it's like, what's you and your buddies probably? Anyway, that's so weird, man. I'll keep with it being playoffs, keep it a little bit positive. First, I want to give a little hat tip to Anthony Edwards. I feel like what he's doing is amazing, making the Timberwolves with two of the softest centers I've ever seen in my life into a likable, fun, winning basketball team is the craziest thing I've ever seen. Hat tip to Anthony Edwards. All out of the week, though, is going to be Donovan Mitchell. This is a guy who, I mean, again, Utah Jazz survivor, right? Just like Rudy Gobert. He's watching Rudy Gobert, succeed. And he's sitting there. He has his 50-point game in game 6. And it's like, oh, man, like you are this guy, but it's just not enough. Your team can't get together. And watching the first quarter of that game 7 against the Magic, and you guys know I love the Magic. I covered the Magic. I mean, Paulo Banchero, oh, my goodness. Beast. I mean, that guy, that guy, I would have been so mad if I was him by the end of that game, because he was getting no help, and he was so built for it. And I want to like praise him as well. It's not me dumping on the Magic. It's the fact that they start this game and they can't get anything going. I mean, their bigs are kind of useless. Their wings are not supposed to really do anything. So it's just Mitchell and Garland is like a spy. I don't know what's going on with him. I don't know if he's got the Jonte Porter allegations going on, but he was just a non-factor the whole game. So Donovan Mitchell, I mean, it's about 2 minutes left in the first quarter, and they have 10 points. And I'm like, this team is cooked. The Magic are raining down threes. And Donovan Mitchell's like, you know what? Not today, buddy. And, he leads a back-to-back. I mean, he had 50 the game before. He had 39 in this elimination. Obviously, a Game 7, every Game 7 elimination game. But the fact of, we'd already written the obituary. Me and Peyton as Pelicans fans sitting there licking our chops going, okay, can we get one of the centers? Can we get Allen, Mobley, Garland? What's going on? Let's see if we blow this team up. We got Stephen A. Smith opening the broadcast by saying, well, if they lose today, Donovan Mitchell's out of there. He wants to be a Knick. And it's that was such a weird, again, kind of crass, unprofessional thing to do, to start a Game 7 and tell Cleveland fans, hey, man, nobody likes you. Your stars are going to leave if you lose. It's just so bad. There's a league appreciator. But anyway, he goes, out on the heels of that, he showed that he wanted to be there. And I think that's so cool. He could have just packed it up and been well, I am going to test free agency. I am going to go on to my next. I'm going to take the easy way out. But I got to give him credit. He showed exactly the type of player that we all love to see in the playoffs, which is a guy that struggles. He was 11 of 27 from the floor. It's not like he had this great shooting day, but when his team needed him the best, he turned in an old school playoff performance in a low scoring game. And no matter what, the weird officiating in the league or whatever, we all just love to see that.
That third quarter was unreal.
Yeah.
I turned on the game for the second half.
Yeah. That was smart.
I would have liked to have seen more fun moments for the Magic. That would have been great.
Yeah.
But yeah, watching the player that he became in the third quarter, that's such a helpless feeling when you just know that other guy is so dialed in. He's getting the bucket every single time. He's getting the bucket or he's getting fouled on his way up, and there's just nothing you can really do.
Yep.
That was, one of the more dominant Game 7 performances that I feel like I've seen in recent memory. More so just that second half that he had, because obviously in the first half he was off, but where I don't know what the Magic really could have done. It's one of the best defensive teams in the NBA, and they still couldn't do squat to be able to stop him. He was unbelievable.
Who's a factor of that? Unfortunately, Tristan Thompson, I feel also swung that game. He was setting really good screens, man.
Still out here doing things.
Yeah, he's got a consistent brand, that Tristan Thompson. Anyway.
Yeah, every time I hear his name mentioned on a basketball broadcast, I'm like, oh, he's
still doing stuff.
Yeah, good for him. Good for him. All right. If you have not, leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch every episode of the Saturday Down South podcast. Follow us on the app formerly known as Twitter, at the SDS Pod, at Set Down South, at CJ Rivera, at Go So Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.